Hello and welcome to the Tifo Football Podcast. I'm Joe Devine, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Jon Mackenzie.
Hello.
Also, Steve Hankey's here.
Hello.
And he joined us for most of the episode, but he's no longer here now. That's confusing from a timeline perspective. It was Seb Stafford-Bloor, so that was very fun. Here's some things that we talked about on today's episode. As the Man United managerial merry-go-round... Right, Steve. As the Man United managerial merry-go-round moves on, we discuss the potential interim managers who are being touted to take the reins until the end of this season. Do you stan? Asks Steve, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer or Michael Carrick. We debate which of those would be better, and indeed why they offer different things or mean different things.
That's a classic double alliteration from Steve in that sentence.
He loves double.
That might be why you struggled with it a little bit.
I think. It might be slightly more. It was you know how sibilance is the kind of is the S.
You could do that without it being at the beginning as well, right? You could still do it in the middle of the words.
Alliteration, I think it was. Should Manchester United ignore nostalgia and hire someone with no association with the Ferguson era? Leave the past to the past, right, Steve? Did we talk about that?
I don't know.
Broadly.
Steve's sneaking his own opinions into these intros.
Are Arsenal the best team in the... What?
We talked broadly about the sporting director model and whether it can actually work at top-tier clubs. Seb had to go because I was trapped in traffic for a very long time. We ran out of time. I would say I usually am a little bit late anyway. I'm not that punctual in the morning. Sometimes around 10 minutes. This morning it was about 30, and it genuinely wasn't my fault. I left 90 minutes before I was supposed to be here.
No, that's fine because we talked about different cultures' approaches to punctuality. So
try telling Seb that.
Well, yeah,
he doesn't respect any other cultures apart from Hamburg.
Hamburg time.
Hamburg time is the only time that he respects. He did kindly, though, talk us through the situation at Strasbourg before he had to leave. And then Jon and I went on to talk about Liam Rosenior, the new Chelsea coach, a little bit about how he plays, a little bit about the person and his broader life. Jon brought up children of the past, British children of the past, thinking about the future.
With received pronunciation specifically.
Yeah, and then I brought up miserable middle-aged people of the past without received pronunciation, and that's our different perspective there. And a West Ham doomed. I hope not, because I will owe someone an expensive lunch if that is the case. Also, Jon talked about high levels of expected bozo moments. That was good fun there at the end. Now, that's the normal intro out of the way. It's very important. It's very important that we do a separate second intro, as you know, Steve, for a certain group of supporters who sometimes get upset with what we have to say. I think everyone will know who I'm talking about. They live in a big city. They can be a little bit sensitive to the truth. They don't like the truth. Yeah. Of course, I am referring to fans of Batman who we upset hugely on last week's episode. Here's just a number of references to Batman. Noah Webb 8016 said, Batman does support, and this is a reference to Jon saying that Batman was a capitalist, Batman does support a lot of initiatives to support the needy people in Gotham, Jon. Unfortunately, however, the city is built on cursed swampland, has a secret cabal of evil running the place as well as 1,000 supervillains, so it's basically unfixable, you know. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Sounds familiar. I bet the Man United board paid you handsomely for that Batman criticism, writes another commenter. The anti-Batman propaganda here is insane. Batman gives employment to ex-cons. He has the Wayne Foundation, that exists. The Dark Knight trilogy is not entirely faithful to the character, writes Top Avo 5. I will not stand for this slander. And finally, we'll say Linton, my son, says Jon Mackenzie's Batman agenda is hilarious. And I assume by that he is referring to how much you hate Unai Emery and Aston Villa.
All I'm saying is if Batman wanted to solve the problems in Gotham City, he could just donate more money.
All I'm saying is that if Batman wanted to solve the problems in Gotham City, then it would help if he had a game model that allowed for consistent underlying numbers, as opposed to like being really, really lucky throughout a whole season and then pretending you weren't.
He just falls back onto the Superman era too much, doesn't he? He can't think outside of that paradigm.
Well, if you're a superhero, you do have to rely on luck sometimes because, you know, the parameters of the world can get quite confusing, can't they? But don't worry, if you thought I was talking about Arsenal, we do on them a little bit, just way at the end of the show. Yeah? You, Steve. Well, where else to begin, of course, than with Manchester United, who we did talk about on Monday's show rather a long time, but it is the biggest news story of the year. And Seb, it's a news story that just keeps on giving. Where were you when you found out? And what do you think about the whole thing?
I was on the Athletic Slack when I found out, actually.
Oh.
Yeah, that was very exciting when I saw the massive David Ornstein exclusive go out.
Seb found out before ordinary people, is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's special. That's pretty much, that's the TLDR version of that. What I think of it, I always thought of Amorim as until the last few days, as a bit of a medium head coach. I didn't think he achieved anything, but I also think he didn't fail spectacularly enough to be dismissed. But then as soon as you heard the things he said in the press conference after the Leeds game, that's the sort of situation where you say those things when you don't intend to come back to that room or see any of those people ever again. And so it felt kind of inevitable. I mean, that's hindsight. But once you start criticizing internal structures and you start litigating club politics in front of the media, that doesn't usually end very well.
Yeah. At the very end, he seemed to kind of forge his own exit, didn't he? Although, I think, as you say, there are some differing opinions about how hard he deserved it and or some of the criticism that's come after. Some of the things that people have said, I won't name anyone specifically, but some of the things that people have said about Amorim and his competence are absolutely extraordinary. And I don't understand how they're allowed to go on the telly. Anyway, let's talk about the two people who might be replacing him in the immediate. Obviously, Manchester United drew 2-2 with Burnley last night at Turf Moor, shepherded by Darren Fletcher et al. But there are two. We thought one name, but there are two names that potentially kind of leading the way. The first is Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, who could be set for another caretaker return. The second is Michael Carrick, who we said this, as recently as this morning, we should probably include in this conversation. Another ex-Manchester United player, another young manager, probably represents something slightly different than Ole does. So let's start with you, John. What do you make of the news stories?
Yeah, I think these are two very different approaches by the club, based around whichever of these two interims they pick. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer obviously has, I think, the narrative energy that certainly you want. I can tell that.
Well, my TikTok feed definitely wants it because all I see is just video after video of those clips of him crying in that interview with, that guy who did the cover of Linger. It's just like all like sad, positive Man United vibes. It's so weird.
It's certainly like nostalgic, right?
Yeah, very much so.
So what? Solskjaer was there for a few years, left in 2021. 1921. He didn't leave in 1921.
He didn't.
He wasn't alive then.
Although he does have the face of someone that could have been alive in the First World War,
Yeah, potentially.
I think that's just because the soldiers were all so young.
But I think, a big part of why Solskjaer was so successful the first time round was in part because he was an interim coach, right? And I think interim coaches...
caretaker. He was a caretaker coach.
Right. So, and I think that sort of gives a weird...
Slightly more permanent than interim, still less permanent than permanent.
Yeah, but
do you know the advantage of an interim coach is here?
What
is you get rid of the long-term discussion.
Yeah,
you get rid of the kind of the what does it all mean? What's it going to look like in a year's time? What are we building towards? And you just accept the fact that this is a block of time where someone is going to do some coaching. They're going to pick some players to represent the side. And then all the focus is going to fall on the football. And in a lot of cases, some of these individual players, because Amorim is gone, and there'll be a couple of players that are really happy about that, a couple of players that are disadvantaged by it. But now, if you bring in a Solskjaer-like figure, who cares, right? Because it's just about the players. He's not going to be there next season. And so you kind of distill it back to its raw ingredients, which I think might be an advantage for United.
I mean, I suppose that's very much true. And that, with Solskjaer, it would be a lot about the vibes. And the thing he kept saying last time was,
yeah, it's what he does.
I just want the players to feel happy again, which was quite nice. I remember it, but and Man United won. 111 of their 112 games under him when he was interim manager, and that's what caused him to get the permanent job. So maybe there's a risk in there as well. This idea that comes around a lot whenever this situation, because we've already felt it with Darren Fletcher too, because for a long time there was a conversation amongst fans that he didn't have the quality to be starting, and no one could understand why he was playing for Man United. He was one of those players for whom a lot of his qualities were a little bit more invisible, players that I think are more well respected today than they were 15 years ago. But because of that, and because of that direct connection, and because of that clearly very strong bond, it was only, within 2 minutes of it being announced that he was going to be interim manager, potentially just for the Burnley game, there were people saying, could he be the next Alex Ferguson? Could Ole Gunnar Solskjaer come back and bring back the Ferguson vibes? Like all these old players, they're the only ones that really know how it was done, because they were there and saw it happen firsthand. And the thing that's interesting to me about that is that there's nothing wrong with wishing for a Ferguson return, but you're doing it in the midst of a situation where the previous manager was literally sacked, partly because it seemed as though he wanted more responsibility than he had in a system with the sporting director, which is the complete inverse of what Ferguson did and how Ferguson thrived. So there's this weird nostalgic, characterization of a position that doesn't really exist anymore, hoping to fill it with shadows almost.
I think it's really hard, because I think because all of those prominent media voices worked under one coach, and that one coach was an anomaly within English football. Maybe it's something similar with Arsene Wenger, I guess. But for a long time, Ferguson represented something which was falling out of fashion. If that's all you know as a professional, and those are the most successful period, that was the most successful period of your career, and your playing career finished 10, 15, 20 years ago, it's got to be very hard to detach yourself from the idea that is the correct way of doing things, just to not to have a coach, to have a king at a club. And that it has to be that way, and it can only be that way, and anything else is just wrong. I think it's difficult. It's obstructive at Man United, I guess, probably is.
I think what's really interesting about this as well is that the end of the Ferguson reign, 2013, there seems to be this view amongst Manchester United fans and the club itself that what happened there wasn't actually like a decline, which was, prompted by an evolution in the way that the game was going, but was sort of almost like, it was like we went through a decadent era or something, right? We came to the end of an old ruler, and what we need to do is get back to that and get a new ruler in who is going to reproduce those conditions. And I just think that's so wrong-headed, because I feel as though it's very palpable that what happened is the game moved on. And part of the reason why Manchester United can't move on with it is because they are so entrenched in that era, and the mindset of that era. Like you say, this concept of we want to have another Ferguson, and in a period when, largely speaking, clubs are moving away from a sort of top-down success model. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, because I think that's an interesting topic. But almost everything else about it seems to be so not even nostalgic, but that the frameworks in which they think are so outdated that it seems that there's obviously a line of correlation between why Manchester United consistently fall back into these ways of being like, oh, should we get someone who made me feel good 20 years ago, right, to represent what my club is going to be. And I think with coming back to Solskjaer, the reason why he's so sort of I guess he has that he's innovating for that fan base precisely because that period when he was there, when the pressure was off, like Seb was saying, and it's not. I think it's not even just that you've got an interim coach who takes the pressure off in general, because there's less of that big picture stuff, which is always pressing down on Manchester United from above. But the fact that it is Manchester United, and they are in the media public eye much more than many other clubs, these sorts of opportunities to sort of just completely distract themselves from that and be like, this is almost like a mini time frame within the broader picture of Manchester United. I think that's why Solskjaer was good the first time around, to a large extent, and it could be a reason for why they will be okay if they choose to go with him this time around. But I always felt in the first Solskjaer era that Manchester United were they were enjoyable to support for Manchester United fans, but there was never really any sense that they were going to be dangerous in a sort of trophies league winning way. In a consistent way, yeah. And they didn't win any trophies under him, right? I don't think so. Which is pretty rare for Manchester United managers post Fergie. There's not many of them who haven't won things, even the ones that people would consider to be the worst ones. Yeah. Well, I think people would say that they had some of their best results under Solskjaer. Yeah.
But no, I agree. I mean, and also I think one of the reasons that the fan base was, aside from all the obvious ones that we've talked about already, was excited at the outset was because we didn't really know what kind of coach Solskjaer was. I don't think anyone had spent that long watching Mulder, people sort of remembered Cardiff in that relegation season, but he could have been anything. So there was always the sort of hope that maybe there were the green shoots of Pep Guardiola buried underneath there somewhere. And I think the reality is they're probably not. He doesn't seem to be that kind of coach.
I guess from a tactical point of view, it felt very much to me as though the solution is always held up as we need this great tactician to come in and make the players more than the sum of their parts.
Sure.
And actually what they got from Solskjaer was, relatively speaking, often a lack of system over the top, and the ability for the players to actually just go out and quote unquote and express themselves. And again, I think that was something that the Manchester United fans enjoyed too, right? Because so often the rest of their footballing experiences in the last 20 years have been getting a coach where they want the system to work, and it almost comes at the detriment of the players at times, and everything feels miserable, and you've got all of these players that you're spending millions and millions of pounds on never quite hitting their potential. And in Solskjaer you sort of got a little bit more looseness and the ability to then enjoy some of those players. I think Rashford for a period was very sharp during that Solskjaer period. I think a lot of football fans or fans of Manchester United look back to that era as the time where Rashford was able to be himself in an extent.
Wasn't that when Bruno first joined the club, he had that spell of about 6 months where he was certainly among the very best players in the Premier League. He had this kind of weird, almost free role, and the sort of the combinations that he had with Rashford, one going down to the left side of the touchline, one running beyond the forward line, the defensive line, sorry. And it was kind of like it was a more fun discussion, whereas when you kind of hit the nail on the head, John. When I think of Man United over the last 15 years, I think of boring football. A really boring to watch, boring discussion, tedious debate about formations. What's this player doing well? Was he worth this transfer fee? Whereas it was looser is exactly the right word. It was a bit more enjoyable to watch. You didn't necessarily have a lot of faith in them always, and you didn't have confidence for them to get over the line and kind of in the title winning sense. But it was easier on the eye for the neutral, definitely.
They did have better players. That is the thing I'm curious about. If Solskjaer does come in and don't do this caretaker role, I'm curious because I think people will have higher expectations than they did last time. I don't think there will be no pressure in that way, and I wonder if the lower quality of the squad might change things.
I think there are some players there that could really benefit from some freedom. Like I thought pretty highly of him before, but I've been watching Ahmad at AFCON playing for Ivory Coast, and he's had a wonderful tournament. He's shown us what a good player he is, and you think, he's someone, right? Give him a little bit more freedom in the attacking sense. Let's see his ability, and for whatever his flaws are, is kind of what I associate with Solskjaer. He's not going to bog players down he's not going to overload them with instruction and dogma, which I think probably helps. And I don't think this Man United squad is that much worse. I think there are some obvious deficiencies, but there's a lot of talent there. Maybe it's not quite as developed, but there is talent.
So that's the argument for Solskjaer as a caretaker manager. What's the argument for Michael Carrick? If you had the choice of both, if both wanted to come and you are Jason Wilcox or whoever is making the decision, I don't know, what would be the argument in favour of choosing
Jim Ratcliffe? Maybe.
What if I was Jim Ratcliffe and I had those sort of expensive gilets and clothes that were presumably picked for me by a fashion-related assistant? What would be the pro-argument for me picking Michael Carrick instead of Ole Solskjaer?
I mean, for me, I think what you would do is you would look at those two coaches and think about the potential to.
It'd be very important to look at them.
Yeah,
first.
I think so. Yeah,
that's always a good place to start.
Make sure you're giving the contract to the right guy. Right.
The most important
listening as well, though, John.
The most important aspect of coach ID, I would say, is
not interrupting.
How often do they interrupt you when you're trying to get into flow?
Exactly. Yeah, stuff like that. No, I think these are two very different profiles of coaches, right? You've got Solskjaer, who you would bring him in and he'd be the feel-good factor, and you might get a nice bump from that. I think in the long run, the question is how far do you see that actually working in the modern game? And I think Solskjaer left Manchester United in 2021. Even in that short time period, I think the game has changed irrevocably. So irrevocably.
It's not cyclical. In 50 years, we're not going to be back where we were.
If you zoom into the cyclicality,
okay.
and you zoom, how people are flat earthers,
so it's temporarily
because when they look at the Earth from their point of view, it looks like the horizon is flat, right?
Got it.
That's what JJ's always saying.
But yeah, if you zoom in like that, like at least in the near term, like the game of football tactically has changed a lot.
Yeah,
is changing. We're still at a point where actually we don't know where it's going to plateau out. There's a good sense that Solskjaer might come in and his approach won't work as well as it did last time around. Whereas with someone like Michael Carrick, he has been coaching relatively recently
at Middlesbrough.
He had an interesting time there. During his time, they put up like good underlying numbers, but they had the capacity to sort of shoot themselves in the foot defensively.
The inverse Unai Emery Aston Villa situation.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. I can't believe you've dragged it up again.
Yeah,
John.
I can't believe. I'm sorry to have brought that up again, but it is the most important.
It's irrevocable
aspect
now.
of Premier League football right now.
Yeah.
But I've always thought with Carrick that the numbers when he was at Middlesbrough, certainly at the beginning, made it like almost worth a club gambling on him to see how good he would do with better players.
Yeah.
And this is like the perfect opportunity to do that, right?
So do you think that the key difference then is that if Solskjaer comes in, he will probably just be the caretaker manager and they'll look for a new contender in the summer? If Carrick comes in, there's a world where maybe he could become the permanent manager in the summer? I
guess the question is whether or not they are able to, if Solskjaer does do well, to resist that. Right? That's the difficult thing with caretaker managers or interim managers or whatever.
Yeah.
Is that
can you resist the lure?
It's true with any manager, right? If a manager sort of hits rough KPIs, like how do you justify getting rid of them?
Sure.
We had the whole conversation about Daniel Farke in the summer after he got Leeds promoted with 100 points.
Yeah.
Big questions about whether or not they should just. It's very hard in those situations.
The best example is still Southampton and Nigel Atkins. I can't think of a more recent.
I guess Iraola and Gary O'Neill,
sure,
recently appointed by Strasbourg. Interestingly enough,
indeed.
But yeah, I think for me, like Solskjaer could be perfectly good as like another 3-year stint to get everything sort of, I don't know, whatever. Give Ineos like a little bit of feel good factor with the fans and stable things out.
I think this is another thing, right? This is another advantage of the interim appointment, because one of my grand theories about coaching appointments is that you should make a coaching appointment when things are still going well, but when you feel that a coach is taking you to the end of a cycle. Whereas the convention says you have to wait until the room is on fire, everything is a disaster, all the players are mutinous and want to leave. And I suppose what you have is what John's just said, like you deliver the team to the end of the season. You have some stability, you have some nice football, some good moments. Everyone feels a little bit happier, and then whoever comes in inherits a better situation. And probably it's not a standing start anymore, right? And I think that's a great advantage.
Yeah.
So okay, who do you pick? Just one word, Carrick or Solskjaer?
I mean, I would go with Carrick.
That's already more than one.
I would go with Carrick just because I think it gives you more than Solskjaer does. I think if Solskjaer does well, it's kind of like, okay, maybe they'll have him for a few years. I don't think he's going to tear up any trees. He's not going to be like there for a dynasty. Whereas at least with Carrick, there's the possibility that he could be the next Alex Ferguson. Or he could just be the next. It's like a quite nice pressure off environment for him to develop the capacity to coach at that level, and then maybe keep him on, see what happens.
Okay, Seb, who do you pick?
Well, I'd just be interested to see Carrick. He's got assistant experience. He understands what it's like to be in that situation, which Solskjaer does. And so purely from curiosity's standpoint, let's see I know what Solskjaer looks like, right? As a coach, I know what the results are probably going to be.
Sure.
Let's see if Carrick can do something to give somebody new a chance. Because one of the things often said about Man United is they have tried every type of coach.
Sure.
Every type of guy has had a go now. So there's no real need to look for an ideologue. We don't need to find someone that represents something, because we can find an example of where that's already gone wrong. Let someone come in with lesser expectations, without a kind of a circus around them, and let them try and build something. I'd be interested to watch that.
I think get them all back. I think get Carrick, Solskjaer, Ferdy, get Vidic in as well.
Gary Neville,
get Gary in, and Dennis Irwin. I want to see him.
Steve Bruce. It
would be great vibes. Speaking of great vibes, let's talk about Ineos, Seb. We know it's great vibes always with Ineos. Is that yeah?
I think that's
Close.
I
No, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I'm saying we know the vibes are hot, great vibes.
Good.
Yeah, they are because it's chemically insisted.
The chemistry is great.
The chemistry is great. That's what I was looking for. Thanks, Steve.
That's very clever, Steve.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Well done, Steve. Yeah,
Thank you.
But
That's good.
thank
That's
God
good
we got his
contribution.
microphone working today.
Yes.
Anyway,
Can you imagine if it had been the only time he made a good joke and we'd have missed it? because
Oh, it
of
would have been
no
such a
mic?
shame. Although I would have heard it through the window and then used it as my own.
Right.
Could have been better, to be
Yeah,
honest.
that's true.
Who could say? I mean, Seb, there are a lot of concerns from Manchester United supporters in this short period of time, particularly those who read Laurie Whitwell and co.'s long read on The Athletic that came out on Monday or Tuesday, the inside story of what happened behind Amorim's sacking. There were various references in that piece to incidents involving Jim Ratcliffe, making suggestions, sometimes making suggestions that didn't seem like the kind of suggestions that you might want him to make were you a Manchester United supporter. What's your perspective on that? Because it's a sort of tricky area that comes up pretty regularly.
Yeah, I think it's a really obvious red flag because the two prominent bits in Laurie and Co.'s piece were there's an incident where Jim Ratcliffe had an opinion on what formation Manchester United were playing. He was more keen on the back four than the back three, the back three which Ruben Amorim was wedded to. And then there was a passage in which it described how he suggested, I think to Jason Wilcox, that Brian Mbeumo should play as a wing back. Now, it's not the quality of those suggestions that's the problem.
Yeah,
it's the idea of Jim Ratcliffe is a minority owner at Man United. You're a businessman, you're an owner, you're very, very wealthy, very successful in other parts of the world, in other parts of the industry, but having purchase on the football department is a little bit of a no-no. And just because it's nothing really to do with Jim Ratcliffe, it's just because anytime that happens in football, when you get an outsider who's bought a club and suddenly takes an interest in the sporting side, there aren't many examples of that going well. Just because the whole reason for employing sporting directors and best-in-class employees, as Manchester United's phrasing went at the time when they kind of restructured their sporting department. The whole idea of bringing these people in is to hand over the responsibility to them. Right, you've got the experience, Jason Wilcox, Christopher Weivel. It's your job. You make these decisions. You have the conversations with the coach about recruitment, tactics, best practice, whatever. And I think a supporter's expectation is always that the owner just butts out and watches on from up high in the stands. And it's not really about Jim Ratcliffe. It's just about the principle of the owner reaching in and having a footballing opinion, I think.
The piece, or the line I found most interesting from the piece also was almost an aside, but it was a comment that Jim Ratcliffe had a direct correspondence with, I believe it was the head of data science at the club, and then there was a little aside afterwards that said, a qualifier that said a relationship which some others at the club found unhelpful, which I think is a really interesting insight.
I think so. And there was also another bit where it talked of Lisandro Martinez having a conversation with Jim Ratcliffe. And again, not really about Lisandro Martinez or Jim Ratcliffe. It was more when that kind of thing happens, you reach back for precedents where a player has reached over a coach and a sporting director and a technical director, gone straight to the owner about something, and you're in a situation where people's authority is being undermined then. Yeah. And again, not many good stories begin with that kind of anecdote, right? It's tricky. It's really tricky.
Very interesting stuff there. We'll keep an eye on that. It also brings to mind, John, the idea of the sporting director model more generally. Jason Wilcox is the sporting director at Manchester United, and in theory, in the way that we would talk about these models in pure terms, would be the consistent factor, would be the person picking the next manager. Not only that, but also would be the person, you've pointed out before, that would set the game model. And so in some ways it's quite interesting, given that it seems as though the fallout here from Amorim, and perhaps one of the reasons why he's ended up leaving the club, does relate to what's happening on the pitch. So there's either a bit of confusion maybe generally around the situation about what a sporting director does, what they should do, or B, a question as to whether, to the degree to which they actually do work in practice in the way that, we've all sort of said they should work in theory over the last 10 years.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting because essentially it boils down to how good/successful your club is.
Right.
I've been thinking about this quite a bit this week. There was a tweet from a Twitter account, Mayor Ahmad, which got me thinking about this. I think it's I'm just going to read. It's lengthy-ish, but I'll get through the first paragraph and we can go from there.
Can you read it in a funny voice?
In a funny voice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you read it as Sean Dyche?
Do you not think that? Okay, I'll do Sean Dyche because I quite enjoyed him.
Yeah.
The whole sporting director is greater than head coach model was created so that the squad doesn't have major transition issues from one manager to the next. It can only work if the sporting director establishes a clear game model, aligns recruitment with it, and appoints head coaches who believe in that game model. It then has to last at least 2 to 3 head coach cycles to reap the benefits of the alignment achieved. Practically, we don't see this happen in elite football at big clubs.
It's not bad. It's okay impression.
That's a very good Daishi.
That is very good. Yeah,
that was very impressive.
Also, it was lovely to hear him talking about it being so effusive about the sporting direction model.
There was a split second where I thought that was a quote from Sean Dyche, and I remember thinking, where did he say that?
I've never heard him say game model before.
Yeah.
Game model? Really? Alignment?
What was it?
Flared jeans, skinny jeans. Flared jeans, skinny jeans.
Yeah. Just for the people like me who weren't able to hear what you said, can you just summarise the point?
Yeah. So I guess the point is.
But can you summarise it as David Moyes? No, go on. That's fine.
The point is that what you get from a sporting director is consistency, which I guess should protect you from maybe having a bad manager or protect you from having poor recruitment and then the tensions between those. With the idea being that if you can get your sporting director to choose the game model, get a recruitment department to recruit for that model, and then bring in managers who are happy to coach to that model. In theory, that should give you longevity. You're not going to have a bad window or a bad coach ruin that. The problem is, as my Amador goes on to say, is that at the top level, it actually becomes much harder to do that because at the top level, the managers are often like for a club lower down the table, your recruitment department can maybe be your big thing. You can sort your recruitment out. We've seen the teams who do this are your Brentfords and your Brightons and arguably your Bournemouths, where they're bringing in players and giving coaches a really good squad to work with that raises their profile.
Yeah.
The problem is that for City, for Liverpool, we saw this with Klopp, Arteta at Arsenal. Those managers are so elite that they sort of drive a lot of the ideas. It's the Ferguson problem,
Pep
right?
Guardiola is we obviously there's a sporting director at Manchester City, but not really. Pep Guardiola, if he wanted a player or if he wanted to change the game model or if he wanted to change anything at the club, he'd be able to. He'd be able to choose, right? Because he's winning. And
the point is that the sporting director sort of has to mediate between the coach and the recruitment staff. And I think depending on how weighted that relationship is. If you've got Guardiola, obviously that relationship is weighted much closer to him.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're a team like Brentford, a great example, right, is that they build the squad, they bring in Thomas Frank, they move Thomas Frank on, and they bring in Keith Andrews, and nothing seems to change. Everything seems fine. They lose strikers, they bring in new strikers. Those strikers are great, and that's I guess the big question is when do you get to a point where you think the manager here is more important than our whole process? And I think it's very interesting that the way that it works, the clubs who have good recruitment always tend to be sort of mid-table clubs. Or at least that sort of sporting director, we have a process model, and then the more successful you get, the harder it becomes to do that.
Like Aston Villa, for example, that have Unai Emery as their head coach, manager, who then a sporting director arrives who he's worked with before, right? Where you could,
and he's moved on, right? And I guess that's the point, is that it's almost the issue here is that Emery has become so important to that club, and that's fine. I think you should lean into it when it's going well.
Yeah.
But the problem is that when that stops going well, then you end up with the situation Manchester United are in now, where they're kind of can't we just get to the end of that process immediately? So maybe with Man United, it should be the case that they have this sporting director model, they get that sort of level of consistency, and then hope to arrive at a coach who they can then start leaning towards above the overall process.
Yeah. Well, let's have a quick break, and then when we come back, we'll pick this sort of topic up again, where we're going to talk about Chelsea and Liam Rosenior, because I think there are some common themes. Now, obviously, we were going to talk about this on Monday. We could have talked about it last week if we were doing a podcast, but we weren't. And then Man United happened, so it sort of got pushed back. In the interim of Chelsea sacking Enzo Maresca on New Year's Day, bless him. They have appointed officially Liam Rosenior as their new coach, I guess, head coach, I would assume is the title there. Liam Rosenior,
Yeah, not manager, coach.
not manager, coach. Liam Rosenior, he's come from Strasbourg, so we're going to talk about what this means for Chelsea, what Liam Rosenior is like as a coach. But I thought it would be interesting first to hear about Strasbourg, who are. Maybe you can explain this better to me, Seb, because people are always saying they're like a Chelsea sister club or a feeder club. I don't really understand. I've never tried to, so it seems like now would be the good time to explain this to me, and then tell me why people are pissed off about it with reference to this move.
Yeah, I was wondering how hard you try to understand it, but not very, right? Not very. So back in, I think it was June 2023, Blue Co, who own Chelsea, purchased a controlling stake in Strasbourg from previous owner Mark Keller. Mark Keller remained as president after the purchase, and he's kind of the Strasbourg identity within the Blue Co-owned club. Now, that becomes difficult because essentially you become part of a multi-club organization, which means that because one club is bigger than the other in this situation and one club has a significantly higher profile, there's one destination in this chain and there's one what looks like a kind of a farm team. And unfortunately for Strasbourg, there have been a couple of incidents, which this is the latest, the Liam Rosenior situation, which has kind of hammered home the point that they're sort of subservient to Chelsea, that they no longer exist to achieve things in football, but to kind of promote talent to the parent club. So you remember back in September, it's actually the day that Strasbourg announced the opening of one of their new stands at their ground. Chelsea signed their captain, Emmanuel Emega. I think I'm pronouncing his name right. Emega. The centre forward who joined Chelsea, he'd be moving in the summer. He was announced as a Chelsea player. He was pictured in a Chelsea shirt at Cobham. And for the Strasbourg fans, it was kind of like, hang on, we're in the middle of a season. Mm-hmm. You're our captain. You're posing with another team's shirt. And it became a controversy. A lot of fans were very angry. There were some who said, Emega's not being treated right. Of course, he's still committed. This is a great move for him. It created a kind of a derailment within their season. Now, with Liam Rosenior, Strasbourg, I think, are 7th in Liga. Please correct me if I'm wrong there, John, jump in. And in the middle of their season, Chelsea have reached in, taken their head coach, since replaced him with Gary O'Neill. But the interests of Strasbourg clearly come second to the ambitions of Chelsea in this situation. Yeah. And also, if you look at it, if you take a few steps back and remember what happened to Crystal Palace last summer. They won the FA Cup, of course, but they weren't able to compete in the Europa League because of the John Textor situation and his his controlling interest, or his investment in Lyon and his involvement with Crystal Palace meant that Palace dropped into the Conference League. So what it's saying, if you're Strasbourg and if you're owned by the same club, is okay, Strasbourg, your aim is not to play in the Champions League. Yeah. Because you can't, because Chelsea want to be there too.
You have a hard ceiling here.
And that is a strike against something really fundamental in fandom, which is optimism. And, even if it's not necessarily realistic, the hope against the expectation that one day you'll reach the top. And when someone says the top now is not there anymore, the top is no longer the top, the top is here, because that's what suits our interests as an organization that owns more than one club. And I got a lot of sympathy. And there's actually, I was reading this morning, I think there's a bill either progressing through or about to be introduced into the French Parliament, which seeks to ban multi-club ownership in France.
Right.
I don't know whether that's going to be successful. I don't know whether there's any, what detail there is behind that. But that's a very interesting situation to watch.
That would be interesting. I would personally, I think off the top of my head.
Do you understand now?
I do.
You get it.
I have ideas, but I'm inspired by what you said.
I want to hear them.
Firstly, I would say, off the top of my head, I'm inspired to say that I can't think of a downside to banning multi-club ownership schemes. I don't give a I think they should do that. I think, maybe someone will correct me and come up with an idea I haven't thought of, but off the top of my head. The second is I really liked the way, and this is what helped me to understand it through your explanation, Seb. I really like the way you talk about the idea of there being a kind of hard cap on hope of where a team can go, and the idea that is central to being a fan and the sporting experience, because it reminds me a little bit of like supporting a mid-table Premier League team like Brentford, for example, who have a fantastic recruitment system and a great game model, but if you're a Brentford fan, you know that okay, you're going to sign great, exciting players who you're going to play there for a year or two, and then they're going to move on because that's what sustains you. It doesn't, there's no actual official reason why you couldn't finish in the top four, and they're doing very, very well this season, but there's sort of a reason. Whereas in the case of Strasbourg, there's actually a hard cap on what they can achieve. So it's sort of like the same thing, but taking away even the final glimmer of hope.
I think there's also an added layer here, which is problematic, which is, so in your Brentford example, every decision that Brentford make, whether it's to sell a player, allow a coach to leave the club, to appoint a coach, every decision they make is to serve the interests of Brentford, right? Whether it's a good decision or a bad. In this instance, the decision for Liam Rosenior to move between Strasbourg and Chelsea, whose best interest does that serve?
Yeah.
Chelsea's, Liam Rosenier's probably. Mark Keller, the president, said he tried to convince Liam to stay, but unsuccessfully. It's unclear at the moment whether or what compensation was paid between the clubs for that appointment. But whose interest is that serving?
Yeah.
And if it's not yours as a football fan, if it's not your club, but it's still a decision which is being made unilaterally, you're going to have a hard time with it, right? You're going to find that really, really difficult. And there's a quote in a piece written by Tom Williams for The Athletic from around the time of the Emega situation back in September, where he spoke to a fan who said, paraphrasing, he said, I'd rather play in the 5th division and for us to be under our own power, basically, than just to be subservient to a Premier League club in League A.
Yeah.
And that's just his perspective, but I have time for it. I've got some sympathy for that. And I think it's, my opinion is I don't like multi-club ownership because it creates this kind of situation. But then I suppose if you're coming to the sport from, for instance, like baseball, where the idea of a farm system exists and you can just take players up and take coaches and move people around the organization because it's just one big vertical line. I get it, and I get the kind of the advantages, but it does kind of ignore the fans of one of the clubs, one of the lesser clubs, doesn't it?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I personally can't think, Seb, that you could ever say anything better than that on the Tifo podcast, so I'm going to dismiss you now.
Thank you.
Never to return. You've reached a peak, and you won't be coming back, okay?
Yeah.
Goodbye. Now he's gone. We can finally say that Strasbourg are currently 7th. Well done, Seb. Apparently, writes Steve, 6th in Liga gets you into the Conference League, 5th Europa League, 4th is Champions League qualifiers, and then 1 to 3 is Champions League full stop, right, Steve? That Champions League full stop, a very exciting brand addition.
That's period for the American listener.
Yeah, period. Champions League period. Now, let's talk a little bit about Chelsea specifically. We've done the woes of Strasbourg. Let's do, what I guess will be the woes of Chelsea in 15 months based on their rate of sacking managers. Very exciting, isn't it? Liam Rosenior, I think you're a fan, aren't you?
I think I'm always excited to see young coaches come through. I worry in these situations that, he's going from coaching. He was an assistant at Derby County under Wayne Rooney.
Right.
Then went to Hull, then went to Strasbourg. It's a massive step up to the Chelsea job. It's incredible scrutiny. Sure. And I've been enjoying, there's been a lot of great content out there that I've been enjoying about the way that he's going to coach Chelsea. Well worth watching. I watched Connor Holden's videos. I watched Harrison, the breakdown video. All good stuff.
H.
From
the overlap.
That's right, yeah. I think the tendency in these situations is always to focus on, like, what are these guys doing in possession, right? Because in possession is the fun bit. It's what we want to see. And Rosenior has great in possession ideas. He'll fit into the Chelsea. They'll fit into this Chelsea squad. There's sort of similar structural ideas to what they're doing. I'd say strategically slightly different in that he feels to me a bit more Roberto De Zerbi coded maybe than Maresca was. Mm-hmm. So that's a lot more about possessing the ball deeper and then having these tempo shifts and more direct attacks when you create that space that opens out, which will be interesting to see. There's always the question of like, how long do you get away with that for when you're at an elite side? At what point do the teams just say, fine, we know what you're going to do here, we're not going to press you, you're going to have to break down a block at some point.
About 15 months?
Yeah, if that.
You're right.
But the thing I always worry about with coaches like this is just the out of possession requirements now are so high in the Premier League. And that impacts on the in possession stuff, right? Because often, for example, with Rosenior, you can say he's actually quite an aggressive coach in possession, willing to take risks, willing to sort of leave himself maybe open structurally,
which is exciting.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
Not that safe.
And will work in a league like Ligue 1, especially when you're not expected to be challenging at the top, and it gives you, I think, a huge amount of like credit when you coach exciting in possession football like that. Yeah. But the big question always is like, what does that look like when suddenly opponents are one, much better at defending, but two, the requirement for you is that you are able to defend the sort of conditions that you create by your own in possession approach, right? If you lose the ball, if you're too open, if you're the profile of players that you have in certain positions is too, I guess, in possession oriented, what will that look like? So I guess that's the question I have running around in my head when I see coaches. And I guess you can make the argument that, to an extent, Ten Hag fell foul of that a little bit.
Sure.
And then you get someone like Amorim on the other hand, who sort of almost felt like he then lent too far in his first season into being, well, we've got to be defensively solid and then work on top of that. And that's the difficulty, I think, for coaches like that who are working their way into the Premier League, because the expectation is that they hit that elite level already, where you're almost like cheat coding between feeling like you've got more players in attack but also more players in defence through tactical structural aspects. So I'm excited. I hope he does well. I also, the elephant in the room here is that, as you said, they have that turnover of coaches because at the end of the day, he's almost expected to do an elite job, but within the conditions of what we were talking about before, where it's like, actually, you are just a cog in this machine, and we're going to give you the players that you're going to have to work with, and you're going to have to be largely subservient to this wider model, which is based around, we've called it they've called it a portfolio model, right? Which is we buy low young players on long contracts, and we look to develop them and generate value in that way. I think there's a lot of pressure on a coach like that to not only mature those players in a financial sense, but that always comes through playing well, right? So it's never quite as simple as being like, well, we're just going to give you young players, let's see what we can do with them. It's like, you have to have success with these players, because if you don't have success, these players aren't going to be as valuable as we want them to be. And all it takes is, a little. I mean, see it with Maresca. We were talking about, are they in? They're nailed on for fourth place. Are they in a title race? We did this the same last season, and they fell away, and that was enough for them to lose faith in the whole project when it came to Maresca. So, it's a tricky situation to go into as an inexperienced coach, I would say.
Well, interesting coach, interesting guy. But I will say he came on the Athletic FC podcast back in October, talked to IO. I think Carl was on that show as well. It's worth listening to.
Yeah, it's a really good episode, that. Yeah,
so check. We'll pop a link in the description. I'm looking at Steve now. Sorry to give you extra work, Steve, but it's worth doing that. Pop a link in the description to that. The reason I say he's an interesting guy is because he said some political stuff that you wouldn't normally hear. I think you wouldn't expect to normally hear a football manager or realms entering into, because it's kind of dodgy territory, and I think a lot of people play it quite safe and play their beliefs close to their chest in this scenario. And also, it's worth pointing out that he is joining what is still a vanishingly small group of black managers to be managing in the Premier League. I think I'm right in saying that the last black manager to manage in the Premier League was Patrick Vieira, Crystal Palace, which was a few years ago. So it's also worth pointing that out, I think. What's your favourite thing he said?
To go back to the episode that you mentioned there, I think the thing that really comes across in that episode, not only is he he's obviously a modern manager, he's smart, he's come through the recent coaching badges, so he's going to be up to date with what you should know as a coach.
Is it the Nagelsmann thing you're going to say?
I'm going to say that. No, I'm going to say that he's emotionally intelligent.
Oh right.
And I think that's super important for any coach. I think at any point in history, arguably.
I prefer my coaches to be emotionally unintelligent. I like it when they can't read a room at all, and when they come in and they get all twisted, and then they just take off. But
he has like, I think, a remarkable perspective on what the job of a manager should be. So his dad was Leroy Rosenior from Sierra Leone. His mum was a social worker. I think white British.
Right.
So I think he has that an understanding of like culture. Culture's not a universal thing for him. For many of us, like, we grow up in a culture, and it's, this is the culture.
Yeah.
And then you experience other cultures, and you're like, wow. And some people deal with that better than others.
This food is spicy.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
That's what you mean, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Not really.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yes, in simplest form.
This
but like,
weather is cold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it does go into more.
These people
tricky,
sleep during the day.
Yeah, tricky territory as well, right? And
many people don't live or come from different countries and cultures.
Yeah, exactly. But he grew up in a situation where he was exposed to the idea that there were multiple cultures from when he was a young boy, and I think it comes through so obviously in the things that he says about his time at Strasbourg, right? Where
it always makes for an interesting person.
Yeah, sure. Exactly. It gives you that perspective, and I think one of the interesting things that he says about that in that interview is that he recognises that different cultures have different like understandings of like time and not just time, but like punctuality, things like that, right? So in certain cultures you have to be on time, or it's it's the worst thing ever. As my line manager knows, right? It's the worst sin I can commit is being a few seconds late to things.
Just to be clear, I'm not his line manager, and I was 30 minutes late
was
today.
Very late. Yeah, but
one of my favourite clips from any Adam Curtis documentary, though, is in Hypernormalisation. There's a clip of a BBC interview with a British businessman in the Middle East. I can't remember what country. But I think in the 1950s or 60s, and he's being asked if he can kind of translate European time into Middle Eastern time, what it means when you're being invited to a business meeting at midday. And this it's such a sweet interview because this quite formal man in the 50s who knows he's on TV, and you know how people were on TV back in the day. They try to express themselves formally and give as best a showing of themselves as they can. And halfway through trying to explain what time he's supposed to show up for a meeting, he just sort of breaks down and laughs a little bit because he doesn't really know how to explain it properly. And I'd never heard before that some people in some Middle Eastern countries have a very different approach to time than British people do.
This is going off topic, but I think we're allowed to do that on this podcast, right?
I don't know.
But
really?
My favourite...
Depends what you say, really, John.
My favourite clips at the moment are those ones where they'll show, like, they interview school kids from, like, the 70s.
I love those.
They're so good, aren't they? But they'll be like, where do you think we'll be in 50 years' time? And
I think we'll be in a submarine.
They don't even sound like that. They're like, well, I think that we may live in a world where we float around on the water in large tubs, and it's so funny. I love this.
I like any British Pathé video where they interview ordinary people from the middle of England, because no matter the decade, you go and ask someone in a town centre, like, what do you think? And they go, I don't give a like, I'm miserable. It doesn't matter the 20s, the 30s, all the way up to the 90s. Now, people have always felt the same level of despair, haven't they? It's quite comforting, really.
But coming back to Rosenior.
Oh yes.
So, for example, one of the things he talks about is the timing of his training day, and the players are expected to turn up for a meeting at the beginning of the day, but before that, they have a sort of team meeting, and then it goes into training.
Right.
But he's very clear that after that team meeting, they don't start the training at a specific time.
Right.
They give the players time to sort of work their way into the day. And
so they do have to arrive at the same time.
They have to arrive at the same time
right.
for this meeting. But then after that, there's a little bit more flexibility where it's like, we're not going to start the training session until all of the players are ready.
Yeah.
And just things like that where he shows like a clear understanding that what we might view negatively as like a lack of punctuality is actually just normal in some cultures. And I think
that's cool.
Those kind of ideas are the sorts of things that for a team like Chelsea, where they have a lot of players from a lot of cultures, will I think endear him to them. And just even just hearing him speak in those terms, I think is it's very clear that he's thought about these things. He's thought about what is required for humans to flourish.
Yeah.
And I think that will set him in good stead to get the players on board enough for him to then try and implement the ideas that he wants to do on pitch as well.
The quote I thought you were going to reference when I asked you if it was the Nagelsmann one was he said while he was on the FC podcast, he said that he thinks management is 90% man management and like 10% tactics. And Julian Nagelsmann famously said, use slightly different wording and like a slightly different balance. So I think it was 70-30. He said it's 70% like social competence or something, you know, but essentially man management, like being a human being and being able to talk to people. And the more you talk to coaches, the more you realise that really is the case.
It absolutely is the case. And like I like to talk about tactics a lot, but the tactics are the easy bits, right? You don't need to be, like there's obviously good tacticians out there, but you don't need to be super good to be a coach who understands tactics well enough to be able to get your team playing well.
But you do have to be skilled enough to like communicate something to someone in the right way. It's
translation, right? It's like the ideas are there. The ideas are sort of cerebral and they're abstract and they're like, if we did this, maybe it would work. Yeah. There's a big difference between that on paper, looking at tactics boards, and then getting the players in that moment. Oh, what are my pressing triggers? Like, or even beyond that, like, where's the most dangerous place for me to be on the pitch right now out of possession? That's really hard thing to teach, like instinct in that way, because that's essentially what they're doing. They're not teaching them the theory. They're teaching them the instinct and the ability to get the ideas into that muscle memory is what's difficult.
And they're kids as well, so I do wonder if like having a young coach come in to work with young kids in that Chelsea squad is going to be a good thing. I'm curious. I mean, he takes over at the weekend for their FA Cup match against who is it, Steve?
Charlton Athletic,
against
I believe.
Charlton Athletic. So that'll be our first opportunity to see him in the dugout. But that'll be a fun one. And as I said, do listen to that FC episode. We'll link it in the description. A West Ham doomed. That's where this is our final topic of today's today's conversation. And let me tell you, this means something to me personally as well as professionally, John.
Really?
Because as you know,
You're a massive West Ham fan.
I've made a friendly lunch-related wager with a mutual friend of ours.
That's true.
And I made it off the back of, who was it that they drew 2-2 with a few weeks ago? Brighton. I made it off the back of their Brighton performance, where all indicators showed they played rather well in that game. They were a little unlucky to not come away with a victory. I said, I think West Ham are going to stay up, having not really looked at the Premier League table that closely. And our mutual friend challenged me to a rather expensive lunch. It's worth saying I have a lunch wager with you about whether Everton will finish in the top half or not. Now that one's still going okay, and I'm wondering, is there a world where I can just get my friend to buy you lunch instead of, and I'm not involved at all. I can play the lunch wagers off against each other. That's what a smart man does. And I'll just go hungry that day. But anyway, West Ham...
Yeah, since then it's not gone well.
It's not gone well. Results-wise, it hasn't gone well. Performance-wise, I am a little torn because I think there have been elements within some of these performances that have shown there's some positivity there with the squad. And also, it's worth saying, whilst their performance and the result against Wolves is really, really not very good. Wolves have gone on a little run, right? Including from that Manchester United performance. So it's not specifically West Ham. They were ahead against Nottingham Forest the other day. They then lost the game. It does look as though it's heading in one direction, but it's still possible for them to get out of this rut.
Yeah, I mean, the Wolves game isn't exactly a 6-pointer because it's looking like Wolves are done, but
sure.
It's a very winnable game for them.
Yeah.
You've got to be winning those games if you want to have a chance of staying up.
You do have to beat the bottom placed team.
Yeah, the Forest game is a 6-pointer, right? At one point, they were actually 1 point behind Forest when they were 1-0 up.
Yeah.
They ended up losing that game, so they're now 7 points behind, which is... It's a big gap, isn't it?
It's a big gap. I mean, it is only the beginning of January. There's quite a long time left, and you do feel as though there's a lot of congestion in the league this season. That one of the reasons that gap looks as big as it is because there's only 4 points between.
It's one of the biggest gaps in the Premier League.
It's because it's one of the biggest gaps.
Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily mean in context like it's not bigger. It's not bigger than 7 points. My point is, there's 5 months left. There's how many games left?
How many is there?
What's 38 minus 21?
Well,
17.
there's 17 games left, right? I feel like that is as ample time to claw your way back from this. And all I'm saying is that some of the performance-related signs that we've seen in the last few games, despite the results, suggest to me that I might not have to buy our friend an expensive lunch. What do you think of that?
I mean, I guess my response to that would be in 21 games so far, they've picked up 14 points, right, which is well below a point per game.
Yeah.
If they went a point per game, which is much higher than their current rate, then they would finish on, what did I say, 17?
41 points.
31 points.
Oh, dear.
Right, and so Nottingham
that's
Forest...
a starter, a main and a dessert.
Yeah, right there. Nottingham Forest, to get to 31 points, only have to get 10 more points in their remaining 17 games. So
yeah.
So
and they're looking pretty good.
They're looking fine. I wouldn't go so far as saying they're looking very good, but it's a rate of change things. Like, yes, of course, 7 points isn't that much as long as Forest don't pick up any points.
Yeah. What about Spurs though? What if they don't sack Thomas Frank? You know?
Yeah, I mean Spurs are now. I guess no, they're still comfortably mid-table. You've got comfortably mid-table, and then you've got Leeds and Forest, and then a jump down to West Ham. And
okay,
Burnley.
so I know you're not calling it, but like it's
hard to see them getting out of this.
Yeah. Can we find the Opta prediction table? Do they have one at this stage of the season?
I can do this for you.
I'd be very curious to know what Opta say the statistical chance.
So you want the predicted?
Yeah, I want to know what the likelihood is that West Ham evade relegation. Avoid?
The likelihood of them avoiding relegation is very low.
Both fine.
The likelihood of them being relegated per Opta is 88% right now.
That's quite high, John.
It is quite high, and then
so
Forest.
12%.
So Forest, by comparison, under 10%, 9.91%. So it's not looking good for them.
The other 3% is reserved for all of the other teams, is it?
Yeah. 3%.
As in, well, if there's a 88% likelihood that West Ham get relegated, there's a 9% likelihood that Nottingham Forest get relegated, then the remaining share of percentage chance must go
is going to currently other Leeds, and that's it. Yeah,
Leeds and Tottenham. Got it. Yeah.
Leeds and Spurs. Yeah, the Spurs are. I think
Opta's prediction model have them sacking Frank in
Spurs
there.
Spurs do still have a possibility of being relegated. They have a 0.11.
There you go.
Yeah, 0.11%.
What about Manchester United? Do they have a possibility?
Manchester United have a 0.02% chance of relegation.
Isn't that higher than Spurs?
No, Spurs have a 0.1.
Oh, right. Okay. So it's 5 times less likely. Got it. An improvement on last season, I would say.
Yeah, certainly.
Well done, Ruben Amorim. Oh, wait. Okay, well, it looks like I'm buying lunch then. I feel as though we've shortchanged maybe slightly West Ham fans, just a tiny bit with all of my lunch chat.
Yeah, potentially.
Anything you want to say about them?
Well, I was going to say that you're feeling that they're looking okay. I think there was elements of that being there when Nuno came in. I think what he did was he did improve them from a defensive structural point of view. Like a lot of the structural stuff that I saw was fine. The issue that they were facing was that they were just having bozo moments within those structures, which
that's the official term.
Bozo moments per 90, very high. So, for example, in the game against Villa, where they went 1-0 up, 2-1 up, for each one of those goals, you can point to little things where you're like, for the rest of the game, they played really well. They probably deserved to win that, but they had a couple of bozo moments, which meant that Villa were able to get goals that maybe wouldn't have been there had they not had those moments, right? So. Right. That's always, I think, the balance that you have to get. You can bring in as many good coaches as you want to fix things like structural issues. But the reality is that if your players are in that headspace where, or even of that quality, where they're not able to consistently perform the tactics, then all it takes is a couple of those moments to concede goals, and then it's very hard to get back from there. So, yeah, my take on West Ham back then was that I still saw them going down ahead of a team like Leeds, which has started to look very smart. So clearly, I knew exactly what was going on. But I think that's the explanation that I would have. That good coaching. The players maybe not quite at the level that is needed to, or performing at the level that's needed to.
All right. Well, there we go. There's an 88% chance that I will have to buy our friend lunch. How disappointing for me.
Do you have any other lunch loans / arrangements going on? Just the two, or is there a sort of web that you've woven?
I thought for a moment that Steve was trying to remind me that I promised to buy him lunch.
Yeah.
But
I mean, we did bet
like
that. I said Arsenal would win the league. You disagreed.
No, I
and
didn't.
It was
no chance, because
No.
in my
Joe has
secret
been-
league prediction, I've said the whole way through that Arsenal are going to win.
Yeah,
that's true.
it's true that Joe has been Arsenal.
Did I revel in the moment where they were only 2 points ahead over Christmas? Yes, I did. Did I hope that there was a chance that the title race would continue to be competitive? Yes, I did. Am I glad that Arsenal are playing tonight and therefore we don't have the capacity to talk about how they did actually lose to Liverpool and didn't take advantage of all of the random draws? I mean, so many Premier League games happened yesterday, we didn't even talk about them. I am glad.
It's dangerous predicting a Liverpool win on this podcast, though, isn't it?
It is. We do know that to be the case. Yeah. Although my West Ham prediction after that Brighton game is looking almost as bad as JJ's Liverpool prediction. Anyway, alas, that's it. See you later.